alternate fantasy games. And Whitney is going to start us off by talking about Pathfinder.
Oh, so kind of on the list of the games that we're going to talk about today, I'm going to be honest, Pathfinder is the most similar game on this list to D&D. And amusingly enough, Pathfinder was actually created based off of D&D's open source system. And it was kind of created by Paizo to be a streamlined rule set for D&D 3.5 edition. As Pathfinder has progressed, its rule system and characters and magic system and things like that has diverted and has made itself a little bit more unique from D&D as the editions have come out. But Pathfinder did start off as, I don't want to say like a supplemental, but it was built as an addition to an extension of D&D. And Pathfinder First Edition is in the community usually referred to as D&D 3.75, just because it really streamlined a lot of the rules and a lot of issues that people had with D&D 3.5 edition. So when you're in the Pathfinder system in fantasy, your world, your rule set, your characters, your magic, your spells, a lot of it is going to feel very D&D like. If you are playing Pathfinder First Edition, there's a reason for that. A lot of the spells are exactly or very, very similar to the 3.5 edition D&D. So there's a lot of that you'll see. But Pathfinder 2nd Edition came out, I think about 2 years ago, and it's starting to kind of make itself its own unique place in the world now. So it's a lot of fun, but your combat systems, your combat centric, your world building, your character sheet building, your rule systems are really going to be very D&D like. I play more Pathfinder than D&D. I like Pathfinder more. I think it's more straightforward, and I like the customization of it more. But they are so very similar, and my gaming group can actually jump between the two pretty easily and pretty quickly, rule set wise. I didn't want to go too much into Pathfinder because it's so similar to D&D.
There was one question in the chat.
Okay. Not really. So the question is Pathfinder 2.0 considered D&D 5.25 then? As I said, Pathfinder 2.0 edition has really started to kind of make its own niche in the world, and it really has started to kind of build itself as its own unique game. I haven't played Pathfinder 2.0 very much. I did the playtest, but that was about it. And I've only done the 5th ed playtest, and they were, yes, the world, like your characters, your archetypes, your classes and things like that were pretty similar, but how you actually built things, how you could customize it, they were different enough that I don't myself consider Pathfinder 2.0 as an extension of D&D anymore. I do consider them, and I feel like they are two unique games now. The next game up, and I'm just going to hand it off, is Jason talking about Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Dungeon Crawl Classics is what is referred to as an old school Renaissance or OSR game. These are games that harken back to games of the 70s and early 80s, the original AD&D, D&D feel. Dungeon Crawl Classics is moderately popular. You can sometimes find it, especially in the Cincinnati area. There are several enthusiastic play groups and that have contributed things like writing modules and such and so forth locally. So there is a culture out there that does play Dungeon Crawl Classics. Dungeon Crawl Classics is very much classical fantasy. Magic, warriors, overwhelming monsters, a little bit of problem solving in the games I've played, but the principal way you're probably going to encounter it is the funnel. The funnel is where you play 4 different characters and you have the opportunity to play all 4 of them at the same time, going through what is basically a meat grinder. And as you go through, certain characters will die off and certain ones will survive, and whichever ones survive end up becoming your character in the game. And they're by no means perfect, but they are customized. And you can end up with things like, I went through the cavern out of time with my thing of cheese dip, and I was successful. Basically because I went in the back and never touched anything that I didn't know what it was. Dungeon Crawl Classics has a vast array of modules out there. And they are very, very traditional, old school modules. A lot of dungeon crawling, a lot of exploration. The setting is fairly generic. So it can be applied and dropped into different worlds. So if you've got your own custom world and you want to drop in a Dungeon Crawl Classics module, you can do that fairly easily. It isn't tied to any one big setting. I've not played Dungeon Crawl Classics too extensively, but I did want to bring it up as an alternative to D&D. And I don't have it does use an interesting die system where if you have advantages, it will increase the size of your dice. So it has funky things like D13s and D15s. And if you're rolling a D12 and things are going well for you, you may get to roll a D14 instead. If things are going bad for you, you may get to roll a D9. There are things like that that help you modify the difficulty. As I remember it, magic was very dangerous, so be warned. It is not your traditional fantasy magic where you just cast the spell and things go off as planned. Same thing with combat. Combat has a lot of interesting variations that make it unique and interesting. Examples would be critical hits where you cut off limbs or stab them in vital parts. Just things that are a little more detailed and lead the GM down a little bit more focused path. That's really all I have for Dungeon Crawl Classics. There are other OSR games we couldn't fit in. A lot of them are pretty good at emulating that sort of genre, but we didn't have a lot of time to cover all of them. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Amanda, and you can talk about 7th Sea.
Yes. So, 7th Sea. Ooh. 7th Sea is, I've heard it described as Princess Bride, the game. It has nothing actually to do with Princess Bride, but if you think of like the over-the-top, heroic, swashbuckling pirate kind of, I know there's not really too many. Anyway, 7th Sea is a game that definitely rewards heroics, and it's got a bunch of lore that you could dive into and beautiful, beautiful artwork, which attracted me to it for sure. I've been playing in a game for about a year now with my group, and we definitely are trying to drag it out so it doesn't end. It's kind of like the setting would be fantasy Europe, if that makes sense. Like, there are definite like parallels between like, oh, that's definitely the Britain of this universe, or that's definitely Spain. It does make for a lot of embarrassing accents that players try to affect during the game. If you have a group that is, you know, theatrical enough, they work on a D10 system. D10s, show and tell. And the interesting thing about this game that I've found different than other games I've played is that it works on this concept of raises. And so you're basically adding up the total number, like you build your dice pool based on, what stats you have, and you add up the total number of your roll, and every set of 10, you get a raise. And there are other things that change that, but that's the basic rule. And rather than just automatic success or failure, you get to discuss with your GM and be like, okay, well, I want to do this really cool, awesome, crazy stunt, and I have 7 raises. So I'm going to use all 7 raises on this turn and just do something outrageously cool. And the GM can, barter with you or be like, oh, okay, like, sure, that would work. Or maybe not because of this, this, or this. Or they can tempt you with something called hero points, which is like even extra finesse and fanciness that you could throw in there. But then you can't act for a few rounds if you use up like everything at once. And so you could just say like, okay, well, I'm going to use 2 of my 7 raises right now to do this, and then next time I'm going to try this sort of thing. So it's a little bit more loose than like a super turn initiative based system, which I thought was kind of cool. It works for a more organic storytelling kind of a feel, and I've really been enjoying it. And I don't think that I will go too much into I could really go into the story. I mean, like many games, you could either focus on like the historical events that have happened in the game and build stuff related to the main like figures in that, or you can go completely your own way and ignore all of it and just kind of use the setting as you would make a sequel to Princess Bride or something like that. But yes, it's like I said, it rewards heroics and fancy stunts and creativity, and I think that's really interesting because it's really on the players just as much as the GM to collaboratively create the story. So I think I'll cut it there and go back to Jason with Dungeon World.
All right. One other thing I want to say about 7th Sea that Amanda touched on, it is both a fictional setting and a known setting. The known setting is you will find very obvious parallels to medieval and Renaissance Europe. The fictional setting is there are some interesting differences in there that, there's magic there. And so, but it's different types of magic depending on the region you're coming from. And sometimes it's having, poultices and herbs, and other times it's using blood to create portals or using the strands of fate to alter things. I wish I could play more 7th Sea. I've played 1 and really enjoyed it. It's one of the reasons we wanted to include it on the list because it's different enough from D&D that, we felt it deserved a mention along with some other ones. Dungeon World. Dungeon World is one of my favorite games. And it is one of the many games on this list that is powered by the apocalypse. What that means is Powered by the Apocalypse uses a very simple, very flexible dice system in that you roll 2d6, you maybe add a modifier, 1 or 2, and the general result is 10 or better, you do it, and there's little complications, whatever you're trying to do. From a 7 to 9, you do it, but there are consequences or complications. At 6 or less, you fail, the GM gets to do something, but you always fail forward, so you mark experience. And that's going to come up again and again and again in a lot of the games we go over, because especially in horror and some of the dystopian ones, and some other ones that we didn't have enough time to kind of go over in depth. But Dungeon World is very much, again, a classic setting. It's not set into any one world. It doesn't have anything like modules. It just basically has the basic book. And instead of having character classes, it has what they call playbooks. So you select a playbook that you're going to play. For example, the fighter, or the wizard, or the thief. And they have certain special things they can do based on when the fiction comes up. Dungeon World is a fiction-first game. You can't say, I want to roll to do an investigation check. What you have to do is you actually say, my character is going to look around the room checking underneath the bed. Then the GM will say, okay, that sounds like you're doing an investigation check. Go ahead and roll for discern realities or something like that. It has a very, very short list of moves. It is very easy to pick up and play. It is very easy to do a one-shot. It is very easy to adapt other systems and other settings and modules into Dungeon World because there's not a lot of mechanics going on it. Because it's so flexible and it has that move system and that 10 plus, 7 to 9, 6 or lower that is universal, it's very easy to play. As long as you know that basic system of 6 or lower, 7 to 9, 10 or better, you can just about play with just knowing that. And that's one of the reasons I really like it. It's very, very accessible to anybody that wants to pick it up and play. It's also fairly inexpensive. You can pick up the PDF for $10, and you can pick up the PDF and the physical book for $20 on certain sites. It's a greatly written. I love the way the book is written, especially the GM advice section. But I don't want to go too much in depth with it because we're running out of time for fantasy. So I'm going to pass it back to Whitney with Mouse Guard.
All right. So Mouse Guard system is based on the comic book Mouse Guard. I can't even see what I'm showing on the screen. There we go. So this is the RPG book. I don't know if anybody's ever seen the comic, but they look like this and they're gorgeous. So the Mouse Guard world is you are kind of like a pseudo-medieval feudal time period where mice are sentient anthropomorphic for that word. And the Mouse Guard protects all of mouse kind. And they go out into the wilderness and they scout and they patrol and they protect all mice from the different creatures that are going to try and take over, that are trying to eat them, things like that. So you see a lot of their foes being like snakes and owls and things like that. As a matter of fact, this is the character Vanguard fighting a snake on the cover of the RPG book. So the world of Mouse Guard has been really kind of built out by the comic system, and things like the seasons and the territory that you're in and the location is a really big factor, because as you know, mice have a hard time getting through snow. They can't get through that as easily. Something as a little bit of just like a little trickle of water is a much bigger deal. So when you're playing the RPG, things like weather conditions and where you are in terrain play a much bigger role in this game than they do in a lot of other games. And the RPG system is based on the gaming system Burning Wheel, but it is a very scaled back version of the Burning Wheel system. So it's kind of referred to as Burning Wheel Light. So it is a D6 system. There are custom dice, but you can roll them as a D6, and there's a gauge between like what numbers equal what of those successes and failures. But it's very much story driven in the sense of you have something called like, hold on. Sorry, I just saw chats coming in. So you have things like instincts, you have skills that are kind of more of like your traditional skills that you would see. So you would see like fighter, hunter, scout, healer. But being able to roll for something to see if you can do something is more about the player explaining how having, let's say, scout 2 would like 2 ranks in the scout ability, how I was raised as a scout by a scout master to be able to specifically track fox through snow to be able to avoid them. And then that is how I can build my role to see if I can track this this fox. Same thing with like if you have mechanics and you need to be able to build a raft, which is what happened in the last game that I played, explaining how I was raised in the city to be able to build lifts and elevators and things like that. I would have the innate ability to find material that would float and be able to bind them together to be able to get us across this river. And then I was able to build my dice pool based on that and then roll. So if you're not as familiar with the Mouse Guard world from the comic books, you don't really need to be. It's still pretty open and story driven. But there is a little bit of like locations and settings and things like that are kind of built in from the books, but it is open to build like your own cities and things like that. So that's it for Mouse Guard, and that kind of brings an end to our fantasy